I didn't know my life was about to split into a before and an after at 3:22 a.m. I was half asleep when my phone started vibrating so hard it rattled against the nightstand. That frantic kind of vibration that immediately tightens your chest before you even look at the screen. His name lit up the dark room, my boyfriend, calling me in the middle of the night. I answered without thinking. "What's wrong?" My voice was thick with sleep, already bracing for bad news. He was yelling, not crying, not scared, yelling, drunk, panicked, angry all at once. "My friend ditched me. She just left with some girl she met. I'm stuck downtown. Send me $150 right now, or I'm literally stranded." For a second, I just sat there, staring at the wall, trying to wake my brain up enough to understand what I was hearing. It was 3:22 in the morning. He had gone out hours earlier for what he called a casual night with friends. I told him to have fun, to be safe. I hadn't asked questions. I was tired of asking questions. "Use your card," I said, rubbing my eyes. "You have your wallet." "My card isn't working," he snapped. "Just send it, now." Something in me finally clicked into place. All the late-night Venmo requests, all the "I forgot my wallet" dinners, all the times I quietly covered rent, groceries, rides, drinks, because it was easier than fighting. I thought about the brand new outfit he'd worn out that night, the one I'd never seen before and hadn't asked about because I was learning to pick my battles. "Figure it out," I said. There was a pause on the line, sharp and dangerous. "Excuse me?" "You heard me," I replied, my heart pounding now, fully awake. "You're an adult. You have a phone. You have apps. Figure it out." He exploded. Accusations, insults, questions about what kind of girlfriend I was. I hung up. My phone rang again immediately. I muted it, turned it face down, and went back to sleep with my jaw clenched and my hands shaking. At 9 o'clock a.m., I woke up to 47 missed calls, a flood of incoherent messages, and one text from an unknown number that made my stomach drop. "This is Officer Rodriguez with the downtown precinct. We need to confirm something about last night." In that moment, every worst-case scenario slammed into my mind at once. And that was when I realized this wasn't just about a late-night call or money anymore. This was about who I had been loving for 14 months, and how much of myself I had already lost trying to save him. I was 29 when all of this happened, old enough to believe I knew the difference between helping someone you love and slowly disappearing inside a relationship that keeps taking. I worked in project management, the kind of job that sounds dull at parties but quietly pays the bills and rewards consistency. My life wasn't glamorous, but it was stable. I liked structure. I liked knowing where my money went, where my time went, and who I could count on at the end of the day. I met him a little over a year earlier, through mutual friends at a casual get-together that was supposed to last an hour and turned into the whole night. He was charming in an effortless way. Not flashy, not arrogant, funny without trying too hard. He talked about his job like it was temporary, something he'd outgrow once he found his thing. At the time, that didn't bother me. We all have phases. I respected that he had his own circle of friends, his own routines, his own life. He wasn't clingy. He wasn't controlling. In the beginning, he felt refreshingly independent. When we started dating, it was easy, light. We split checks without awkwardness, took turns cooking, spent weekends wandering the city, talking about nothing and everything. He laughed at my dry humor. I admired his spontaneity. We balanced each other, or at least that's what I told myself. The shift was subtle enough that I didn't notice it happening. It started with small asks. "Can you grab dinner tonight? I left my wallet at home." Then, "Can you cover this one? I'll get the next." The next never quite came, but I didn't keep score. Love isn't transactional, I told myself. Couples support each other. When we moved in together, the lines blurred further. We agreed to split expenses evenly. Rent, groceries, utilities. On paper, it was fair. In reality, I paid on time every month, and he always had a reason his half was late. A delayed paycheck, an unexpected expense, a friend's birthday that he couldn't miss. I stepped in, again and again, because the alternative felt like conflict, and conflict felt exhausting. His friends became a bigger presence in our lives, nights out that turned into early mornings. Just one more drink. Just one more place. He loved the energy, the attention, the freedom of not being responsible for anyone but himself. I started staying home more, telling myself I needed rest, that we didn't have to do everything together. But there were moments that stung. Watching him get dressed to go out, excited in a way he hadn't been about spending time with me in weeks, noticing new clothes, new habits, new stories that didn't quite add up. His family liked me, at least on the surface. His mother praised me for being so understanding. His sister joked that I was the responsible one. At the time, I took it as a compliment. I didn't realize it was also a warning. I was being quietly assigned a role I never agreed to play. There were signs I ignored because ignoring them was easier than asking what they meant. The way he'd deflect when I asked about money. The way every serious conversation somehow turned into me reassuring him. The way my needs slowly stopped coming up at all. By the time that Friday night arrived, the night he went out with friends and called me at 3:22 a.m., I was already tired in a way sleep couldn't fix. I didn't know it yet, but the story of us had been heading toward that moment for months. The call didn't create the crack. It just made it impossible to keep pretending it wasn't there. Looking back, the tension didn't arrive all at once. It crept in quietly, disguising itself as normal relationship friction, the kind people warn you not to overthink. I told myself every couple goes through phases. Every person has rough months. I didn't want to be the girlfriend who kept score or questioned every detail, so I stayed silent longer than I should have. The first thing that changed was his patience. Conversations that used to flow easily began to feel one-sided. I would talk about my day, a deadline at work, a meeting that went wrong, and I'd notice his attention drifting. His phone would light up. He'd nod without really listening. Then, without transition, he'd start talking about himself, a plan, a problem, a favor he needed. Money became a constant, unspoken presence between us. Not discussed openly, just hovering. If I brought it up gently, he'd sigh like I was accusing him of something cruel. "Why are you making such a big deal out of this?" he'd say. "It's not like I don't appreciate you." Appreciation, I learned, didn't come with follow-through. It came with promises, vague timelines. "I'll pay you back when things settle." Things never settled. His friends didn't help. They joked about how lucky he was to have me. "Must be nice," one of them said once, laughing, when I picked up a tab without comment. Another time, someone casually asked if I was his sugar mama. Everyone laughed. I smiled too, even though something inside me tightened. Humor has a way of making uncomfortable truths feel harmless. There were nights I lay awake listening to him come home late, the sound of keys fumbling, shoes kicked off carelessly, his body heavy with alcohol as he collapsed into bed. He'd kiss my shoulder and mumble something affectionate, as if that erased the distance that had been growing between us. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe we were still a team. His family added their own quiet pressure. His mother would ask how he was doing financially, then look relieved when I said we were managing. His sister once pulled me aside and said, "He's always been like this. He just needs someone stable." I didn't realize she meant me. I thought she meant encouragement, not responsibility. The doubts came in flashes. A declined card at a grocery store he brushed off as a banking error. A rent transfer that never showed up until I reminded him twice. A new jacket, new shoes, nights out that didn't match the empty look in his checking account. When I asked where the money was going, he'd shut down. "Why are you interrogating me?" he'd say. "Don't you trust me?" That question worked every time. Trust is a powerful leash. I didn't want to be controlling. I didn't want to be cynical, so I swallowed my concerns and adjusted myself instead. I cut back on things I enjoyed. I paid quietly. I told myself this was temporary, that love meant patience. But the air between us kept getting heavier. Small disagreements turned sharp faster than they used to. He'd accuse me of nagging. I'd accuse myself of expecting too much. The emotional imbalance mirrored the financial one. I was giving, smoothing, fixing. He was taking, deflecting, moving on. The night he told me he was going out with his friends, I remember watching him get ready. He seemed excited in a way that felt foreign. His energy was outward-facing, like the night mattered more than anything waiting at home. I told him to have fun. I meant it. But a part of me felt oddly detached, like I was already bracing for something I couldn't yet name. By the time my phone rang at 3:22 a.m., the conflict wasn't new. It was simply exposed. That call didn't come out of nowhere. It came from months of imbalance, avoidance, and choices I'd allowed because I loved him. The seed had been planted long before that night. The call was just the moment it finally broke the surface. When I saw the message from the officer, all of the frustration I'd been carrying collapsed into something colder and sharper. Fear. The kind that strips everything else away. I called the number immediately, my fingers trembling as I pressed the screen to my ear. Downtown Precinct, Officer Rodriguez speaking. I introduced myself, my words rushing over each other. He confirmed my boyfriend's name and told me he'd been brought in around 4:30 a.m. for public intoxication and disorderly conduct. No charges, no injuries. He was physically fine. They just needed someone to pick him up. Relief hit first, fast and dizzying. Then anger followed just as quickly, flooding my chest. I thanked the officer, said I'd be there within the hour, and hung up. I sat on the edge of the bed for a long moment, staring at nothing, replaying the call from the night before. He hadn't called me for help. He hadn't called because he was scared. He'd called because he wanted money. The drive downtown was silent. No music, no podcasts, just the hum of the engine and my thoughts looping relentlessly. I kept imagining him at the club, drunk and demanding, arguing with security, refusing to leave. I imagined him pulling out his phone again and again, calling me, growing angrier each time I didn't answer. And I wondered how someone could feel so entitled to my resources while giving so little of himself in return. At the precinct, the fluorescent lights made everything feel harsher. An officer directed me to a waiting area. I sat there with my hands folded tightly in my lap, my jaw clenched, my foot tapping against the floor. 10 minutes later, they brought him out. He looked awful. Makeup smudged under his eyes, hair messy. The outfit he'd been so excited about the night before was wrinkled and stained, the confidence that came with it completely gone. The moment he saw me, his expression twisted into anger, not embarrassment or relief. "Where were you?" he hissed as we walked toward my car. "I called you all night." "I was asleep," I said, keeping my voice steady. Like most people are at 3 a.m. We got into the car. I started driving. For about 30 seconds, there was silence. Then he exploded. "I can't believe you didn't send me the money," he said, his voice rising. "Do you know what I went through? I was stuck outside that club for an hour. It was freezing. Security got aggressive with me. Then the cops showed up and treated me like a criminal, all because you couldn't send $150. I gripped the steering wheel harder. "You weren't brought in because I didn't send you money. You were brought in because you were drunk and aggressive with security." "That's not what happened." "That's exactly what the officer told me." He crossed his arms and stared out the window. "You weren't there. You don't know." The silence that followed felt thick, charged. After a few minutes, I asked the question that had been circling my mind since the call. "Why didn't your card work?" "What?" he said too quickly. "You said your card wasn't working." "It just declined." "When was the last time you checked your balance?" "That's none of your business." "It became my business when you called me in the middle of the night demanding money." He didn't answer right away, then, quietly, "I'm maxed out." I pulled into a parking lot and put the car in park. "What do you mean, maxed out?" "My credit cards," he said, staring at his lap. "They're maxed, and my checking account is overdrawn." "How much?" I asked. "Does it matter?" "Yes," I said, "it matters." 8,000, he muttered, and about 300 over in checking. It felt like a physical blow. $8,000. I thought about the rent I'd covered, the groceries, the utilities, the nights out he'd never worried about paying for. And suddenly, everything lined up with brutal clarity. "What did you spend it on?" I asked. He didn't answer. He didn't have to. I already knew. The drive home was quiet again, but this time it wasn't tense. It was final. Something fundamental had shifted. The incident wasn't just a bad night. It was a revelation. And by the time we pulled into our apartment complex, I knew there was no way to unsee what I'd just learned. When we got home, he went straight to the bedroom and shut the door hard enough to rattle the frame. I stood in the entryway for a moment, keys still in my hand, listening to the echo fade. The apartment felt different, quieter, heavier, like the air itself was waiting to see what I would do next. I sat on the couch and let everything catch up to me. The calls, the officer, the number he'd finally admitted out loud. $8,000. It played in my head on a loop, not as anger at first, but as shock. The kind that numbs you before it hurts. I thought about every time I'd defended him to myself. Every time I'd said, "He's just stressed," or "He's figuring things out," or "This is temporary." I wasn't crying. That surprised me. I felt hollow, like something had been scooped out and left clean behind. I replayed the last 14 months, not the sweet moments, but the small dismissals I'd brushed aside. How often I'd adjusted my expectations downward to keep the peace. How rarely he'd asked about my day without turning the conversation back to himself. Around mid-afternoon, he came out of the bedroom, showered, changed, looking almost like the man I'd fallen for. That made it worse. He sat across from me on the couch, leaving space between us, like an invisible line neither of us wanted to cross. "We need to talk," he said. "Okay. I think you overreacted last night." I laughed. It slipped out before I could stop it. A short, disbelieving sound. "I overreacted?" "Yes," he said firmly. "I was in trouble, and you ignored me. What if something bad had happened?" "Something bad had happened," I wanted to scream. "You were detained by the police, but I didn't raise my voice. I stayed calm, almost eerily so." "You weren't calling to make sure you were safe," I said. "You were calling for money." He threw his hands up. "You're still on this money thing?" "Yes," I said, "because it's not just money, it's what it represents." He promised he'd pay me back. I asked how. He said he'd figure it out. I asked when. He didn't answer. The silence stretched between us, thick and uncomfortable, until the truth finally settled into my chest. "I think you should move out," I said quietly. His head snapped up. "What?" "I think we need to break up, and I think you should move out." He stared at me like I'd spoken a different language. "You're breaking up with me because of one night?" I shook my head slowly. "I'm breaking up with you because of 14 months. Last night was just the final straw." He tried to list things he did for me. Dinner sometimes, emotional support. But each example fell apart under its own weight. I wasn't arguing anymore. I was observing. And in that moment, I realized how exhausted I was from carrying both of us. When he left to stay with a friend, the door closing behind him felt strangely peaceful. I didn't feel victorious. I felt resolved. For the first time in a long while, I wasn't questioning myself. He didn't come back that night, or the next. At first, the silence felt like relief. I slept better than I had in months, my body finally unclenching from a tension I hadn't realized had become permanent. But by the third day, the quiet was interrupted in a different way. My phone started buzzing again, not with his name, but with names I recognized all too well. His friends. The first message was almost polite. "I heard what happened. That was kind of harsh, don't you think?" I didn't respond. The second was more aggressive. "He could have been hurt. You don't just abandon someone like that." Then came the calls. Voicemails. Accusations wrapped in moral outrage from people who had never once asked how I was doing when I was quietly paying the bills and keeping everything afloat. Apparently, he'd told them his version of the story. In it, I was cold, calculating. A girlfriend who abandoned him in a dangerous situation and then kicked him out over nothing. I was painted as heartless, as someone who chose money over love. The irony would have been funny if it didn't sting so deeply. His family got involved next. His sister texted, asking if we could talk this through like adults. His mother left a voicemail heavy with disappointment. "Relationships take sacrifice," she said. "You can't just walk away when things get hard." I listened to it twice, feeling something shift inside me. I had sacrificed, I had stayed, I had carried, and none of that had been enough. I didn't defend myself. I didn't argue my case. I blocked numbers when they crossed a line. I refused to explain myself to people who had already decided who I was based on a half-told story. That restraint wasn't easy. Every instinct in me wanted to scream the truth, to list every payment, every late-night worry, every time I'd put myself second. But something deeper told me not to. Meanwhile, he resurfaced intermittently. Short messages, long messages. Apologies followed by excuses. I was embarrassed. I didn't mean for it to get this bad. Everyone's struggling right now. Each message circled the same point without ever landing on responsibility. He wanted relief, not accountability. Reassurance, not change. The tension peaked the following Saturday when he showed up with 2 friends to collect his things. I wasn't home. I'd planned it that way, spending the day at my brother's place to avoid a scene. Later, I returned to an apartment that felt lighter, but visibly altered. His clothes were gone, some kitchen items missing. His key sat neatly on the counter. There was a note. "You'll regret this. I was the best thing that ever happened to you." I read it once, then I crumpled it and threw it away without ceremony. Not because it didn't hurt, but because it confirmed everything I needed to know. Even now, even at the end, he couldn't see beyond himself. The escalation wasn't loud or dramatic. It was relentless. Pressure from all sides. Doubt whispered in the quiet moments. But with every message, every accusation, something in me hardened into clarity. I wasn't losing control of the situation. I was reclaiming it. The night after he took the last of his things was the hardest. The apartment was too quiet in a way that didn't feel peaceful yet, just empty. No television noise in the background. No footsteps pacing when he couldn't sleep. No phone lighting up with questions, complaints, or requests. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to my own breathing, and for the first time in weeks, I finally let myself feel everything I'd been holding back. The doubt came in waves, not about the facts, but about myself. Had I been too harsh? Had I waited too long? Had I somehow failed at loving him the right way? Those thoughts crept in quietly, wearing familiar disguises. You should have seen it sooner. You should have handled it better. You should have tried harder. I replayed the moment I told him to figure it out. His shocked silence on the phone, the anger in his voice. Part of me wondered if that single sentence had revealed something ugly about me. Another part knew that sentence was the first honest boundary I'd set in a long time. I cried then. Not dramatic sobs, just quiet tears that soaked into the pillow. I mourned the version of the relationship I thought I had. The future I'd imagined without ever realizing I was the only one truly planning for it. I felt foolish for how much I'd given without asking for balance in return. Foolish for mistaking endurance for love. The messages from his friends echoed in my head. The disappointment in his mother's voice. The implication that I was selfish for choosing myself. It hurt more than I wanted to admit. I'd always been the reliable one, the understanding one, the woman people counted on to smooth things over. Letting that role go felt like losing part of my identity. That was the lowest point. Not the phone call, not the police station, not the confrontation. This quiet moment, alone in the aftermath, questioning whether I was strong or simply cold, whether I had protected myself or abandoned someone who needed help. But somewhere in that darkness, another realization surfaced, slow and steady. Love should not feel like self-erasure. Support should not require silence. And exhaustion is not a normal state of being in a healthy relationship. I didn't feel empowered yet. I didn't feel proud. I felt empty. But emptiness, I would soon learn, is sometimes just space waiting to be filled with something better. The shift didn't come with a dramatic confrontation or a triumphant speech in the mirror. It came quietly, through a conversation I almost didn't answer. About a week after he moved out, my phone buzzed with a number I didn't recognize. I considered letting it go to voicemail. I was tired of being pulled back into explanations, tired of defending a decision I'd already made, but something told me to pick up. It was a mutual friend, not one of his inner circle, someone neutral, someone who had never asked me for favors or taken sides before. "I just wanted you to know," she said carefully, "that what you were told isn't the whole story." She explained that she'd been at the club that night, not with him directly, but close enough to see what happened. She'd spoken to a security guard later, someone she knew from previous nights out. He confirmed what I already suspected. My boyfriend hadn't been stranded. He'd refused multiple offers to call a ride. He'd argued with staff. He'd escalated the situation himself, and when the police arrived, his first instinct wasn't fear. It was entitlement. He kept saying his girlfriend would fix it, she said quietly, that you always did. That sentence landed harder than anything else had, not because it shocked me, but because it stripped away the last layer of doubt I'd been clinging to. I wasn't imagining the pattern. I hadn't misunderstood. I hadn't overreacted. I had been cast in a role, and the moment I stepped out of it, everything collapsed. After that call, I sat alone on the couch and felt something unfamiliar settle in my chest. Not anger, not sadness, certainty. I thought about how much energy I'd spent trying to be patient, supportive, understanding. How often I'd ask myself what I could do better instead of asking why I was the only one doing anything at all. For the first time, I stopped framing the breakup as something I'd done to him and started seeing it as something I'd done for myself. He texted later that night. A long message. Apologies mixed with self-pity. Promises that sounded sincere on the surface but vague underneath. "I've been thinking a lot," he wrote. "I know I messed up. We can fix this." I read it once, then I put my phone down. I didn't feel tempted to respond. I didn't feel the urge to explain myself again. I didn't feel responsible for guiding him toward growth. That responsibility had never actually been mine. The turning point wasn't dramatic, but it was decisive. I realized my worth didn't depend on how much I could endure. Love didn't require me to keep proving my loyalty through sacrifice. And walking away wasn't cruelty, it was clarity. That night, I slept deeply for the first time since everything began. Not because the pain was gone, but because the confusion was. The consequences didn't arrive all at once. They unfolded slowly, the way truth usually does when it's no longer being propped up by someone else's effort. I watched it happen from a distance, not with satisfaction, but with a strange, detached calm. A few days after that call, the messages stopped. His friends went quiet. The same people who had been so eager to defend him suddenly had nothing to say. I didn't ask why. I didn't need to. Silence has a way of revealing where loyalty actually lives. Then I heard from someone else, another mutual friend, this one embarrassed, almost apologetic. She told me his parents had found out about the debt, not the vague version he'd been feeding everyone, but the real numbers, the credit cards, the overdraft, the pattern. His father had stepped in, forced him to move back home, cut up his cards, put him on a strict budget like a teenager who couldn't be trusted with an allowance. I didn't feel vindicated. I felt tired. This wasn't a victory. It was the inevitable result of a long series of avoided responsibilities finally catching up with him. On social media, he tried to control the narrative one last time. Posts about growth, about betrayal, about learning who people really are. I didn't respond. I didn't block him either. I just stopped looking. The people who mattered already knew me. Everyone else was free to believe whatever version made them comfortable. A month later, I got another message from an unfamiliar number. It was one of his friends, someone I'd always sensed felt uneasy about his behavior, but had never spoken up. She apologized. She told me she'd witnessed him using people financially for years. Friends, family, me. She said she wished she'd warned me sooner. I thanked her, and I meant it. Not because it changed anything, but because it confirmed what I'd finally accepted. I hadn't lost anything of value. I'd simply stopped subsidizing someone else's lifestyle. The final test came quietly. Another friend reached out, asking if I'd consider talking to him again. Just a conversation. Closure, they called it. I declined politely. There was nothing left to explain. Walking away didn't ruin his life. His choices did. I just stopped cushioning the fall. 3 months passed, and life didn't just return to normal. It improved in ways I hadn't expected. The apartment felt calmer, lighter. I bought a new couch, one I chose without negotiating color or price, and it became a small but meaningful symbol of the space I was finally allowed to take up. I started cooking again, not out of obligation, but because I enjoyed it. I slept better. I laughed more. My body felt like it belonged to me again. Work picked up in a good way. I earned a promotion I'd quietly worked toward for years, one that required focus and confidence I hadn't realized I'd been giving away at home. I started going to the gym regularly, not to change myself, but to reconnect with my strength. I went on a few dates, nothing serious. I wasn't in a rush to fill the space he'd left behind. I was learning to live comfortably inside it. I heard updates through the grapevine. He moved back in with his parents. His father monitored his finances. He disappeared from social media for a while, then returned with a brief new me phase that didn't last long. None of it stirred anything in me. I didn't feel bitterness. I didn't feel curiosity. I felt done. Someone asked me once if I regretted not sending the money that night. I didn't. I also didn't regret ending the relationship. The only regret I carried was not trusting myself sooner, not recognizing that love should feel like partnership, not management. That generosity without boundaries slowly becomes self-betrayal. I learned that sometimes the most compassionate thing you can do is step back and let someone face the consequences of their own choices, not out of cruelty, but out of clarity. You can care about someone and still refuse to carry them. That night at 3:22 a.m. didn't end my relationship. It exposed it. And once I stopped trying to save something that was draining me, I realized how much lighter everything could feel. Sometimes the hardest lesson isn't learning when to hold on. It's learning when to let go.